Welcome to AASHTO Resource Q&A. We're taking time to discuss construction materials testing and inspection with people in the know. From exploring testing problems and solutions to laboratory best practices and quality management, we're covering topics important to you. Now, here's our host, Brian Johnson.
Welcome to AASHTO Resource Q&A. I'm Brian Johnson.
And I'm Kim Swanson, and we have a few guests today, Brian. Why are they here?
We've had episodes in the past where we've talked about standards development, particularly on the AASHTO side with the AASHTO Committee on Materials and Pavements, COMP. But now we're going to get into what happens after that COMP process and the standards development and production and editing and sales and all of that magic that happens between those committee meetings and when those standards arrive in your inbox or at your door or however you get them. So to talk about that today, I've got AASHTO Publications team. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks, Brian. Yeah, this is Erin Grady, Director of Publications at AASHTO. Thanks for having me on the show.
Happy to have you. Deb Kim.
Hello, everyone. I'm Deb Kim. I'm Assistant Director of Publications. I am the Pub's project manager for materials. Happy to be here.
Thank you. And then last, we've got Greg Pearson. Welcome, Greg.
Hi, I'm Greg, as Brian said, and I am the bookstore and digital publications manager, a title which doesn't actually convey too much. So I run our online store, do our PDF conversions, and also am a copy editor. So I have read and copy edited many of the standards.
Yeah, that would be a lot for business card, Greg. So thank you for the explanation on what you do, though. We'll get more into that later, too. Erin, we're going to start with you as director. Why don't you give us the rundown about what AASHTO Publications does?
We are essentially the tail of the dog here. So much of the hard work happens from the committee side and through our liaisons that work with the committee to help develop the original native content that gets through and is balloted, as you know. Comes to us in a variety of ways, but typically we like everything to come to us in kind of a clean document that's been obviously balloted and vetted by the committee and lots of other folks. But we start our process where we begin with signing something and initiating it, assigning it to a project manager editor who then takes it to the next level of hardcore copy edit, proofreading, review, looking to find obviously grammatical errors, but looking for inconsistencies, inaccuracies that we as copy editors and proofreaders do not answer. We just flag them to provide queries back to those subject matter experts who obviously are much more suited to come up with an answer faster than we would be able to research it. But we're just basically flagging it that something doesn't look quite right. It doesn't read very well. We come up with wording suggestions that goes back to the experts to either approve or say, nah, we'd rather it go some other direction. And from there, we're kind of back and forth, depending on the complexity of the standard or the publication that we're working on. Sometimes that can be a multi-level review period. We have multiple rounds. We try to make up as much time while something's out for tech review with our queries by working on a cover design. And then when everything comes back, we tend to then do the layout. And many times in material standards, it's in Microsoft Word to keep it consistent with all the many specs that are in that book. But for the other publications that we do, we also work in design software that's for desktop layout that's much better suited for columns, artwork, figures, photos, that kind of thing. In which case, then we are sending out that layout for final review to make sure that we haven't messed something up by laying something out. We usually will catch queries along the way. And from there, it goes on to our digital review person, in this case, it's Greg, to go onto the store to do his final quality control, getting it ready for online. He is a fresh eye. He hasn't seen it during the whole production. For example, Deb's been looking at this publication for weeks and weeks and months, and having a fresh eye just helps to just give it a much more well-rounded read through as he's getting it ready for online. There will almost 100% of the time be additional queries or questions that come from that process. Goes back out for tech review. We finally get another response to those queries. And if all goes well, then we get it back with approval and we can then post it on our online store and or print it, depending on what the publication is. We do all of our publications in digital format. with fewer and fewer going into print. But there are some books, like the materials book, that remains in print based on our customers' needs. Probably a little long-winded, but it hopefully gives you a nutshell approach to a very complex process, but that we enjoy and really hope brings the publications to the highest quality to really emphasize all the hard work of the committee.
Erin, as you're going through that whole summary of what you all do, I got to thinking that, I mean, the materials publications is just one of so many different publications that you are working with. And I don't even know the answer. I've been with AASHTO long enough that I should know the answer to this, I think. But how many publications do you have?
Well, we release about 25 to 30 publications a year. We have about 200 titles. That does not include each individual material spec. So add an additional, 800 to that number. But actively, about 200 full titles. Right now, just to put things into perspective, we have about 19 titles in production at various phases of production. And that's, some of them are very short. They might be 25 to 50 pages. And then you might have some that have closer to 1,500, 1,800 pages if it's a large bridge spec, by the way. So so we have a lot going on here.
Well, how many people are on the team?
Including myself, there's 9 of us. And that
9 of
includes, we've got, between Greg and Deb, we've also got 2 other copy editors, project managers. We have 2 senior graphic designers, and we also have a part-time admin, as well as a publications marketing manager.
Wow, that's a lot. We talked mainly about what goes on in the comp realm, but those other publications that you manage, do they have similar interactions with committees? And is there a similar process for development of those, whatever those publications are?
Yes, we've got a similar workflow for all of the technical publications. We do have some non-technical, like policy type things, but it all goes through a committee, is balloted, and comes to us. And sometimes it'll come to us in chunks, as Erin mentioned, instead of all in one neat package, which we do like better. But yeah, it comes from the committee or from authors contracted by the committee. So for instance, if it started life as an NCHRP report, then the principal investigator of that NCHRP report might be the one who's sending us files rather than the committee directly. But yeah, everything has to be edited. Your listeners would be surprised how much we actually catch. And we're not engineers, not by any stretch of the imagination, but if something doesn't scan right, if something looks ambiguous grammatically, then we will ask them about that and say, did you mean this, or this, or something else?
Yeah, I know I play that role sometimes at resource for some of the things that we do, that I'm a fresh set of eyes of that. I don't have the technical background, but I know enough to know something's might not be right or might need some clarification. So I can respect the importance of that role as you're trying to communicate so much information, especially technical information around that. I'm curious as well, how long is a typical process? So let's use the material standards as an example, but how long would you say is the process from when you get the balloted changes and everything like that, from it comes into your hands to it's out the door and ready for distribution? How long does that take?
Well, there's a lot of pre-production before we even get the files, because we're pulling the meeting minutes apart and ballot reports. If there are any negative votes or negative comments, we want to make sure we've got that in there. So when we get the files, if it looks any different from the ballot attachment, then version of the standard, then we go look at that and go, oh, okay, that's why that's different, because the tech chair was addressing that comment. So I started doing pre-production on materials in late October. I got the first tech subcommittee handoff in early November, and the book releases digitally on the very last working day of July. That's our typical workflow from year to year.
That is a long process, but just describing but thinking about everything that Erin described earlier and all of the work that goes into it, that also feels like a very short process at the same time. So it feels like that is a very jam-packed amount of time. and a very
Yes.
busy time to
Yes,
do.
as a project manager, I look at those task dependencies and go, I better keep these deadlines on track early on, or it's just going to be a nightmare 3 months later.
And I would say outside of the materials book, unless you're talking about a very big bridge book, the average book I usually tell folks when they ask me is about a 3 to 4 month process. And imagine that's like a 200-page spec of some kind. The smaller policy committee reports, we usually can turn around in 4 to 8 weeks, something like that, depending on how much redesign. A lot of times it comes down to waiting on artwork for the cover design to come through, which you think would be the easiest part. But that's why we're always trying to work behind the scenes while other phases of the process are going on. So we're kind of making up as much time as we can.
And with covers, we actually have to vet any cover photos to make sure that it's technically appropriate for the subject of the book. It's not showing any improper safety practices, and it's not just grab a few pretty pictures off the web.
Oh, please don't. Please don't do that. Copyright infringement.
And then the other thing with that is a lot of the subject matter experts that we deal with are volunteers. And some of them are volunteers who are doing that as part of their job. It's part of their duty assignments at the agency that they work for. But for some of them, it is not. And they have to do the query review and responses on their own time because that's something that they feel is their duty to the industry. And so that can make it difficult to enforce deadlines on them because they are not our employees and they are often working nights, weekends, holidays to get this stuff done. So that also can impact the speed of the production process because there is a lot of waiting to get query responses for these extremely busy people to have time in their schedule to work on our stuff.
Absolutely. And I would say from the comp meetings that Deb does an outstanding job explaining what the sequence of events are going to be, what the deadlines are, what publications is dealing with deadlines so that people have an understanding of why we can't just publish this now, why we can't just throw another ballot out there to get this out there now, because it's important to me. I know I've gone through the process of writing a standard, balloting it, putting it through the provisional phase, and then now we're going through this, trying to make it a real standard so that we can actually use it in the industry. And it takes years to do it. But there's so much that goes on that people don't understand. And I'm hoping that this episode helps clear some of that up. Deb, what are some of the real challenges that you face working with the volunteers who presumably do not work in publishing, right? To get them to participate and still maintain AASHTO's expectation quality of these publications, not just the standards. I know I'm heavy on the standards part, but any of the publications you work on with volunteers.
Well, they are happy to work with us. They have a real sense of pride and ownership in these standards. And so any delay is really their real job, demanding so much of their time because, everybody's really busy. But when you're working in transportation, there's some really critical deadlines in that as well. So they do the best they can. And we have Mark Felag, who's not on this podcast, but plays a very critical role as the Secretary of Comp, doing some gentle reminders to people that we need them to hand off their files, or later we need them to respond to the technical queries. And regarding the technical queries, when we send those out, we'll have questions about standards that are balloted, sometimes questions about standards that aren't balloted, but we ask them to review every balloted standard to ensure that our edits haven't inadvertently introduced any errors. We try to query everything, but sometimes even just the addition of one comma could change the meaning of something. So it's important that even if we don't have queries for a standard that they've balloted, they still need to go in and take a good hard look and make sure it's okay for publication.
Yeah, you do a great job with that. I don't think I've ever really run into any issues where I've seen publications make editorial changes that ostensibly changed the intent or even the practical explanation of what a step is in a procedure or a requirement for it that's in a specification. But yeah, I could see where that would happen. And I know you were talking about, or maybe I was just inferring this from what you said, but a lot of times the people who work on the standards, they may be technically competent, right? But then they might need a little help in getting that translated to something that makes sense to the end reader. And at least in comp, I haven't really seen that be a real issue, but I do appreciate when I get questions from people who understand editing or grammar or communication when we get some comment about, especially Kim is the master of this on our side, where somebody writes something down and she looks at it and is like, what does that mean? And then we have to think, okay, what did we mean, or what did I mean when I wrote that, and did I communicate that effectively? And it really takes somebody who's not buried in the minutia of that kind of work to be able to shine a light on that, the effectiveness of communication issues. So I think long way for me to get to the point of saying that I think AASHTO Publications does a really nice job helping us make the most of our ideas and our thoughts in the technical publication. So thank you for that. I also want to say, Deb, I think you're very brave in the way that you allow people like me to go into the library and upload a new version of the standard. That frankly scared me quite a bit because I'm like, okay, I'm going into this. This is the standard that is going to be used, and I am uploading it, overwriting the standard that is then going to be end up finally being the publication. What do you do after that? Because I'm certain that I can't be the only one who had some level of uncertainty with uploading a new document. What do you do to safeguard that from people like me screwing it up?
Well, you are definitely not the only one, especially a newer tech chair might be very, very nervous about that. But, it is a SharePoint site, so there are various versions. So in the absolute worst case, we can revert to a prior version of the standard. But we do go in and make sure that everything is okay. There are no glitches with the Word file, that 99% of the time it's fine. But if they're really, really feeling nervous, then they can email me the file instead, and I'll check it out and make sure it's okay and upload it on their behalf before we start doing any other work on it.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate that you kind of put it in the hands of the volunteers to do that too, because then it really hits home that okay, we really expect you to make sure that you get this right before it comes to the editors that don't have that technical knowledge to be able to decide if this change made sense or not from a technical perspective.
To add to what Deb said, I think that is sort of nerve-wracking, I think, especially for the newer tech chairs. And I think Deb is fantastic in responding to emails. So I think that's one of the things we would like to just put out there is to whenever there's a concern or question, please just pop an email because we would love to make sure that we're directing folks to the right place. Because I will say one of the main challenges I think we face, besides just the complexity and the length of the production cycle of this book, is really making certain that folks are picking up on the most recent version in the library, because a lot of times we'll get edits to a file that's one version back, and it takes Deb and Greg, like we'll just be really late in the process, but something will come up and be like, uh-oh, we know that change was already made. We saw that, so that was already something. So it really takes us back to they started with the wrong version. So that's a kind of a word of caution, is just always being sure to check that the date is the proper date and to really ask questions. Sending an email to Deb, she will certainly respond quickly to make sure that we're all starting off the right version.
Part of the right version is making sure that it is locked down. File protection is turned on because we want to make sure that all of the changes are flagged. And if it's not a protected file, then it may very well not be the final file from the previous year. So then we need to do a copy compare to make sure that they're not undoing edits from the previous year, such as our global edits. So with those provisionals, when they become real standards, then they get a brand new standard number. So if that standard has been cited as a provisional anywhere, then we need to go and change that citation to the new standard number for every standard that cites it. So those are the sorts of things that get lost if the file they upload to the library is not the right version of the standard.
In a previous episode, Brian was talking about upcoming changes to AASHTO R18 and the balloting process that he went through there. And one of the points that he made was that he wanted to make sure that nobody else was trying to submit another ballot for R18 and all those things to kind of worry about the version control and making changes to the document that is the most current version of it. So thank you for the insight on that. I think those two parts together can really help make sure that AASHTO is putting out the best information going forward.
And kudos to Brian, because R18 was rather complex this year. There were 3 ballot items proposing changes to the standard. One was withdrawn, so there's still 2 ballot items that all of the changes need to go into a single file. And he did that for us, and I really appreciate that because it does get complex.
Glad you like that because it was a pain, and it's going to be a pain next year when I make the next ballot too. but I will make sure to maintain version control. Don't you worry about that.
So just to interject briefly in case someone in the audience is having a panic attack, what we're talking about is R18-23, the version that will be published on July 31st, 2023. There were no changes to R18 in 2022, so if you didn't buy it last year and you're suddenly having a heart attack, don't worry, it's next year that you have to update it. We haven't actually made any changes to R18 since 2018.
Thank you for that clarification, because I can envision some lab managers having a minor heart attack at that if they were not familiar with that. So I definitely appreciate that. And the AASHTO accreditation program for those accredited laboratories does require participants to have the most updated and current version of all of the standards. So that is important information to know that next year is the year.
And we require that you have current and legally acquired copies. That is something that is going to be in the 2024 version, that specific language. That was in the big ballot that didn't pass, but it doesn't mean that it's not still the case. So don't go out there stealing copyrighted information, people. That's a bad move. Anyway, Greg, let's talk about how we get these standards in people's hands now legally. What's your role in making sure that people can get these standards once they're published and other documents that Publications puts out?
All of our publications, including our standards, are available from the AASHTO store online at store.transportation.org. We also have an 800 number you can call if you really want to order by phone or by mail. We offer the standards in 2 different formats. You can either buy them in print or as a PDF. As we've mentioned, we really make an effort to get the PDF available on the last business day of July every year. So that will be July 31st, 2023 is when the new version of the standards will hit in PDF. Print, we try to get as close to that date with the print version as we can. Right now, there is actually a huge worldwide paper shortage caused by a number of plants closing during the pandemic. It is getting increasingly hard to get things printed in a timely fashion. We're hoping we'll be able to do better in 2023 and get the print version closer to that July 31st PDF release, but it may be a few weeks later, a little too early to tell. So as PDF, you can get either a single user or multi-user version. Our PDFs are always concurrent users. So if you buy a single user, that doesn't mean you are the only person in your lab who can ever use it. It means that only one person in your lab can use it at a time. And All of our PDFs are fully printable. Again, according to the license, you shouldn't be printing more copies than you have licenses for. That's part of the legally acquired thing that Brian was talking about. But it's also not going to limit you. So if you spill a bunch of hot asphalt all over your standard when you're doing a test and can no longer read it, it's perfectly fine to throw that one away and go back to the PDF and print it again. And once you have a PDF, it is yours to keep. They don't expire. They may get superseded and they're no longer the valid standard. But if you ever need to go back and look at the old version for some reason, maybe a project that you were doing in a previous years getting audited and you need to reference the materials you were using at that time, you'll always be able to go back to the store and download a new copy. No matter what happens, it stays in your account forever. And if you don't need all 600 of our standards, we also sell each one individually. So if you just need R18, if that's the only thing you're doing, then you can just go and buy R18 on its own or any of our other standards. Generally, if you regularly use 10 or fewer standards, it's cheaper to just buy them a la carte. If you're using in the 10 to 15 range, it kind of depends. Standard pricing varies by length. So if you're using a bunch of long standards, then at that point, it's better to buy the complete collection. And if you're using more than about 15, then you're pretty much always going to save money by buying the whole set.
I just wanted to circle back about the paper shortage because the materials book is particularly sensitive to that because we use a specialty paper for it because it's so large. It's 5 hefty volumes, the print, and it would be even bigger except that we use a special lightweight paper on it. I think it's called Bible paper, actually. So it's super lightweight, but still sturdy. And so, yeah, very few paper manufacturers produce that paper.
I just learned so much information from both Greg and Deb right now.
One other thing I wanted to mention is that it says in R18 that standards have to be available and understood by the staff. So keep that in mind. Go back, rewind, listen to what Greg was saying about how you can use those multi-license agreements properly, because I don't think that that's well understood by a lot of people. So I appreciate that information. Speaking of areas that might be a little confusing, Greg, can you speak to what the most common areas of confusion are related to delivery of publications that you've heard, since you often get some of these questions from people?
If there's one thing that I would like every user of the standards to know, it's how to figure out what the most recent version of a standard is, because there is a lot of confusion about that. And you can actually tell by looking at the standard number when it was published and what's current. We actually did a survey of standards users 2 years ago to see how well understood that was. And we did a little quiz of showing people standard numbers and asking when was the standard published. We sent it to every purchaser of the material standards in 2020, and only about a third of the people got it right. So let's talk about R18. So if you look at the standard number for the current version of R18, it's R18-18 parentheses 2022. And I want to go over a little bit what that means. So R means it's a standard practice as opposed to a specification or a test method. 18 just means it's the 18th standard practice that AASHTO published. You, the listener, don't care about that either. The -18 is where it gets important, though. That means it was last technically updated in 2018. So if you purchased it in 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, or 2022, it's technically the same version, and that's fine. You do not need to update it. R18-18 is the current version. The parentheses 2022 does not mean we updated it in 2022, which a lot of people think. What it actually means is that the committee reviewed it for technical accuracy in 2022 and decided that no technical changes were needed at that time. So that's telling you that, yes, we've looked at it. Yes, we still think it's valid, but it doesn't mean we changed it. If you have R1818 without the 2022 after it, that's just as good as R1818 parentheses 2022. So when we do update it in next year, it will become R18-23. So that's another thing that is a point of confusion often among people who are doing testing contracts. If you specify R1818, you're saying that you must use the 2018 version of that standard. If you just specify R18, then you're saying you should use the latest version of that standard, whatever that happens to be. So if it's 2024 and you're putting out a contract that says your people are supposed to be doing this to R18, R18, even though R1824 is now out, then you're saying people shouldn't be using R1824. They need to go back, find their old version, and use R1818. And I think a lot of people who are writing contracts don't really understand that they're making that decision and think the -18 is part of the standard number and don't realize that that's just the year. So there's kind of two things on the part of the lab or the manufacturer. It's to know when you need to update it, and it's when that number after the dash changes. And then on the part of the specifier, it's to know whether you want to specify a specific version or whether you want people to use the latest version. And there are valid reasons for doing both. You just should understand what you're doing.
That was super helpful, Greg. I hope everybody caught all of that. Deb, did you have something to add?
Yes, and if they didn't catch all of that, in response to the survey results, we also added a designation key to the header of each standard. So, you've got the title and then you've got the designation number. Below that, we have a little line that says what year it was revised, adopted, reclassified, any of that to the left. And then if it was reviewed and not revised, then that number will be shown in the middle and it will say reviewed and not technically revised. I forget the exact wording. Greg will know that. And then if it has had any editorial revisions, which is not what we in pubs do, that's anything that the committee decides needs to be done as a correction or clarification, but hasn't been validated. So something that came up at one of their meetings and they said, yeah, we need to correct this, then those are the editorial revisions that might be flagged with that third position, the right justified editorially revised this year or that year.
If you didn't catch it when I said it and you don't want to rewind and listen, if you have the full standards book, there is a section in the front matter on page Roman numeral X, so page 10, that says about AASHTO designation numbers, and it has a written description of everything that Deb and I have just said. And our intention is that maybe after the 2023 publication or maybe in 2024, we're going to do another survey to see if these changes that Deb was talking about have actually helped people and if the understanding in the future is better. So yes, this will be on the quiz.
Thank you for all that information. And I did want to let our listeners know that we have a webinar that we recorded in the AASHTO Free University webinar series, and it's Standards as a Second Language that does kind of go into some of this as well. And it talks a little bit about how to dissect and read, basically, and understand ASTM standards as well. So it goes into both AASHTO and ASTM standards, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes if our listeners want more information on that.
A couple people were talking about the parenthetical date on the end. Just from an insider look at committee view, that also means that for R18, for example, that Brian has been dragging his feet for several years, and they had to reapprove it instead of put a new date on it. So that's why. So that draft ballot took me too long to get out, or we wouldn't have had the parenthetical. So sometimes when you see that date, it means it's also not being managed as actively as it could have been managed. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it happened.
I just wanted to add that review cycle. If a standard hasn't been revised after 4 years, it does have to be reviewed. So standards that haven't been revised are not languishing with nobody looking at it on a regular basis. Every 4 years, each standard is reviewed by the subject matter experts.
And I think our oldest standard, if I remember correctly, is a -65. So you don't have to feel too bad, Brian.
Well, I appreciate that, and I will take that and run with it. Aaron, I want to go back to you and give you kind of an open forum here. What do you wish people knew about AASHTO Publications?
We so value our customers and our AASHTO members, and the fact that we play such an important part to make sure that we get this content out, have it be as legible and as attractive in formatting and as accurate as possible, that we really follow through the steps. My team is incredibly passionate about making sure that they do everything they can to make sure these documents are honoring the hard work that went into the development of them. And I guess I would like folks to know that our store has got a little bit of everything. You can find so many different categories of information. We also have an archive section for those if someone's needing to go back in time to look at things that have been sunsetted but still may be relevant in some legal cases or what have you. And that we really are juggling a lot in our publications team, but we really do believe in what we're working on. And I'm so fortunate to have a team that our youngest person in our team has been here for 3 years, but the average lifespan of an AASHTO Publications person is 15 years or more. I'm so lucky to have such a veteran team that is very experienced. And if you have any questions, we always are really hoping that folks will reach out to us so that we can help direct people to the right publication and or help with any questions they may have about ordering. So thanks again for the opportunity.
I just wanted to ask what other things are available at store.transportation.org. I know that the standards are there and the other publications, but is there anything else available?
Do we have AASHTO Resource Q&A mugs or shirts or something? I mean, what kind of merch do we have on the AASHTO store, Greg?
Not much in the way of merch at the moment. Many years we do a calendar, but we do not have a 2023 calendar, unfortunately. We are merchless at the moment. There are also a lot of training courses available, however, and several of them do, in fact, deal with certain of the standards, particularly with test methods, where you can do an online training course to kind of walk you through how to do that test. The courses are all online, do at your own pace kinds of things, and you can get a certificate in professional development hours for many of them.
You talked about what's available at the store, but I know some people get their standards other ways. They get them through other vendors. Are those legitimate versions of the standards? What are those relationships you have with other vendors?
Usually they are legitimate. I'm sure there are some that are not, but we have official reseller agreements with several other organizations that sell standards on our behalf and then pay us a royalty. Usually that's so that they can be included in a multi-organizational platform where you can get AASHTO standards and ASTM standards and IEEE standards and SAE standards or all sorts of others. So our official reseller agreements are with TechStreet, IHS, ASTM Compass, Novel. The IHS thing is Engineering Workbench. Novel has a platform, and then there's a company called Academic Pub that mostly does course packs for students, and SAI also. We're working on a couple others, so there may be more in the future, but those are currently our official resellers, all of whom also sell material standards as part of their subscription platforms or on their own. Often it's at a bit of a markup over what you get buying directly from us because, of course, they have to pay us a royalty and make their own profit. But if you want a multi-publisher subscription platform, then that is often the best way to get them because the AASHTO store does only sell AASHTO standards. So
Is there anything that end users can do to do the due diligence to make sure that they are working with an approved reseller?
there isn't really a sort of stamp that we put on authorized things. If you have questions, you're always welcome to contact AASHTO Publications. If you go to the AASHTO store, there's a publications questions form that you can put in, and that actually will go to me. And either I will answer it directly, or if it's something more technical, like you have a question about using a standard or something, then I will forward that to the appropriate subject matter experts. I know Brian sometimes gets those.
Yeah, I'm happy to get those kind of questions, but everybody's always really responsive on the publications team. And I know I appreciate it, and I think the customers do as well. So thanks for mentioning that.
And one thing I wanted to make sure that we mention is that AASHTO accredited laboratories are eligible for a discount on the AASHTO publication. And I know I send out an email every year to accredited laboratories in our system with the code and details about the new material standards. So if you're an AASHTO accredited laboratory, you should have gotten one of those emails from me for 2022, and you'll get another one in spring, summer for 2023. But if you have questions about that, you can email me at kswanson@ashtoresource.org, and we can determine if you are an accredited laboratory that received that discount. And the discount is for you get the publication at the AASHTO member price. So that is what the discount is. And Greg, do you want to explain the difference between AASHTO members and non-members?
I can do that. I will also add that the discount is for purchasing the full set of standards from the AASHTO store. It does not apply if you are buying individual standards, does not apply to any other AASHTO publications, and it does not apply if you are buying from a third party. AASHTO is the Association of State Transportation Departments, so they are the 52 state DOTs are our core members. They pay us a lot of money in annual dues, and they get a discount on our publications as one of several member benefits. Other transportation agencies, cities, counties, federal agencies, Canadian provinces, or agencies outside the US that are involved in transportation can become AASHTO associate members. The dues for that are $3,500 a year. You get several benefits with that, including the member price on all AASHTO publications and trainings.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Aaron, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Deb, I appreciate everything. All the stuff that you do behind the scenes, before and after, is really incredible. I appreciate everything you do. Appreciate the time that you spent with us today.
Thank you. I really appreciate the committee as well. The Committee on Materials and Pavements, they are just a really hardworking bunch and really a pleasure to work with.
And finally, Greg, thanks for your time today and for all the information you provided.
It was great to be here. Thank you for having me. And I hope I was able to answer some people's questions. And I'm always happy to answer more.
Thanks for listening to AASHTO Resource Q&A. If you'd like to be a guest or just submit a question, send us an email at podcast@ashtoresource.org or call Brian at 240-436-4820. For other news and related content, check out AASHTO Resource's Twitter feed or go to ashtoresource.org.